Why not?
Recording is started.
They're worthy.
So Deputy Mayor, this is Sean. I'm just going to give you one quick reminder to confirm with Teresa before you move on to the next item that there's no hands raised that you were unable to see, okay?
Okay. I'm going to actually make a comment about that to council tonight as well.
Okay, perfect.
So is Teresa in the chamber, are you doing roll or is Teresa doing roll?
Teresa's going to be doing roll. I'm actually just a guest watching.
Okay, very good.
I mean, they're supposed to do it.
Okay, a couple more minutes before we get started.
I was under the impression that we're not supposed to have guests.
The public is invited to sign in to view the council meeting.
She's the special guest, James.
Always a jokester in the crowd. I think I'm gonna turn that volume down. Yeah.
Let everyone know how much emails you really get.
Okay, good evening, everybody. This is our March 30th, 2020 City Council Study Session, once again being conducted virtually and telephonically. Teresa, will you please call the roll?
Deputy Mayor DeCoursey,
Here.
Councilmember Baggett,
Here.
Councilmember Brown,
Here.
Councilmember Sharash,
Here.
Councilmember Malinga,
Here.
Councilmember Stearns, Councilmember Stearns, Councilmember Trout-Manuel,
Here.
Okay, thank you. Any announcements, reports, or presentations? Okay, Council, I have one quick housekeeping item for tonight. As we're meeting virtually in our study sessions, since we're not in close contact with one another, I want to remind everybody that we need to follow the same protocols as we do when we're in council chambers. So with that, when we're meeting virtually, like we've done in council chambers, I'm going to ask you to raise your hands to be recognized to speak. It does a number of things for us. First of all, it keeps us in compliance with our council rules of procedure, which is procedure section 6.1. It follows the parliamentary procedure process, and also it can limit any type of confusion if we have a council member perhaps speaking over another council member. So I appreciate your cooperation with that tonight. And if I can't see your hand raised, then Teresa can and will be recognized. So with that, let's go ahead and get started on our agenda items. We only have two agenda items this evening. The first one is agenda item 4A, ordinance number 6764, Director Thomas.
Good evening, council. Thank you.
Good evening.
Good evening. I'm going to be going over budget adjustment number 6. This is our second budget adjustment for 2020. If you recall back in November, we did our 2020, and that really realized significant revenue that we had at the time in November. The primary for this budget adjustment is to pick up carry forward items from programs that we had budgeted in 2019 but had not completed in 2019 and we're carrying forward into 2020. We also have a couple of new program requests and we also have some project realignments in this budget adjustment as well. Just as an overview, the total budget adjustment is adding $3.9 million in revenue and adding $10.4 million in expenditures. A reminder that this is for all funds throughout the city, so this isn't just the general fund, but these are our capital project funds as well as our internal service funds. And I'm going to go through some of the bigger items, the most worthy items, and I will and show that really these changes mostly affect those capital project funds and not so much the general fund, especially in light of the city right now. I think hopefully these big numbers don't cause too much concern, but if you have any questions, please ask at any point. So I'm going to go through, beginning on page 4 in your council packet. We outlined some of the significant changes or the most noteworthy changes, and I'm going to start with the first type of change that we have in this budget adjustment, which is realigning significant revenue sources. And one of those is a reduction of our telephone utility tax. We are reducing that by $275,000. Normally, we would have picked this up in our November budget adjustment, our first budget adjustment. It did get missed. All this is doing is adjusting our revenue down in 2020 to be more in alignment with the trends that we saw in 2018 and 2019, which in general is a general decline in telephone utility tax revenue. In other realignments in this are really much smaller in how they affect the general fund. It's mostly new grants and expenditures associated with those grants. And so even though there might be a new revenue, they do have an expenditure also associated with those new revenues. The second category in this budget adjustment is carry forward. The title is carry forward unspent expenditures for 2019. So these are all items that we are either contractually obligated to or projects that we are currently underway doing, and we need to carry forward that budget authority from 2019 as we continue completing those projects in 2020. For example, in the general fund, the most significant ones are the residential housing capacity for $200,000, which is a grant-funded project. We've got the facade improvement program for $130,000. Our homelessness response budget, there was $129,000 remaining in that, and as well as our inclusive Auburn program, which was the program that the council had approved earlier in 2019. All of the directors have been working, as well as the council members have also been working with our consultants on that. A big number that stands out in this budget adjustment is actually under this carry forward category, and that is the purchase of the Auburn Avenue Theater for $647,000. This was paid for on 2028, and it was funded with money. So this isn't, this was restricted revenues that we had specifically is only available to be spent on certain governmental capital projects. Back in, was it late November or early December, council had approved of the purchase of the Auburn Avenue Theater with the REIT funding. The sale actually didn't occur until 2020, so this is just a housekeeping item to get our budget in sync with when the transaction actually took place. So then going into the next category of budget adjustment items on your council packet, page number 5, is adjusting capital project budget. And in the council packet, there are several projects listed. I'm not going to go through every single one of them, other than to note that all of those projects, with the exception of 3, actually have new grant funding identified, and we're also budgeting to offset those expenditures for. So even though some of those projects, some of those expenditure numbers are very large, are new grant revenue sources as well. The 3 that do not have offsetting revenue sources are coming from our water and sewer capital funds, and that is for some property acquisition for the Lee Hill pump station replacement, as well as Toluca Dead End Main for 104th Avenue Park improvement, and then $950,000 in the sewer improvement fund for sewer pump station electrical improvements. So then the very last piece of this budget adjustment is adding budget authority for a new program. Was there a question? No? Okay. The
Yes,
last
there is a
piece
question,
of
sorry.
the budget amendment is adding budget.
Jamie?
Jamie,
Yeah,
there is a question.
okay.
Councilmember Trotman-Weil?
I had a question back on the theater purchase. So
Sure.
that 600,000 that we purchased it for, on page 11, what is that 9,750? That does that mean that we still short that, or what? Could you explain that a little bit?
So on page 11, which number are you looking at? Oh, the very report.
Yeah.
We transferred $647,000 into the Parks Construction Fund in REIT money. The actual purchase, I'm guessing that the difference was probably some closing costs associated with that purchase. So the extra $9,740 was actually paid for out of the Parks Construction Fund ending fund balance and not with the REIT revenue transfer. There was a small portion not paid for by REIT money.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that.
Sure. Then on the new programs, there is one large number which is really driving the total expenditure, which looks like an expenditure request for the general fund, and that is $2 million, and it's titled the Remove Non-Departmental Contra Expenditure Account. This is more of an accounting, this isn't increasing budget authority so much as it's removing a contra account that we used when we initially put the 2020 budget together to try to get a better idea for what our ending fund balance would be, knowing that we have an underspend each year. This is removing that anticipated underspend, and we will allow the real budget to actual align that by the end of the year. So it's to explain, we're not adding budget authority. We already have our total budget authority. This is removing contra account that we had originally added there to give us a better idea for where we thought we would end 2020 when we originally put the 2019-2020 budget together. The other new budget item is $85,900. This is the impact that the new state's minimum wage is going to have on our Parks Department with all of our intermittent and part-time employees that we employ out in all of our parks programs. And this is one of those unfunded mandates that we have to make sure that we get into our budget because it is going to be a cost throughout the year that we incur. And then the other 2 items that were new items not originally budgeted is the CDBG, or the Community Development Block Grant Award. So that is new expenditure offset by new grant revenue. And then in one of our internal service funds, the equipment rental replacement fund is to schedule the purchase of 2 police vehicles that need to be replaced. They were not at the end of their replacement cycle. They were damaged before the end of the replacement cycle. However, the purchase will be funded by insurance money. So the total impact to the insurance or to the equipment replacement fund is a net zero with the insurance recoveries. So that's a very high level, some of the big items, the most notable items in the budget adjustment, and I'm going to ask if anybody has more detailed questions.
So, Jamie, Deputy Mayor DeCoursey, I have one quick question for you on the fund, general fund for the adjustment to the parks budget.
Yes.
For those intermittent employees, does that include the temporary employees like the baseball umpires and other employees like that?
It would. Anybody that is, yes, because anybody that is employed, we now have a minimum wage. Their minimum wage has increased. If we were originally making minimum wage, anybody that makes anything less, or anybody that makes anything more than minimum wage, we could even increase.
Okay. And perhaps that number may be adjusted even further as we continue to move with our restrictions for social distancing and other items that have restrictions on them.
Yeah, I fully anticipate that we're going to be coming back with budget adjustments both on the revenue and expenditure side as we get further into the year, and as we get more information about how we're going to move forward with our 2020 budget. And you're absolutely right, that is probably one area that will need to be re-looking at and adjusting.
Okay, great, thank you.
Councilmember
Questions,
Stearns?
council, any other questions?
Councilmember
Yes,
Stearns?
this is Councilmember Trout. Jamie, could you explain the water fund, sewer fund, and the storm drainage fund with the increased budget of the Teamster contract? There was an increase.
Oh, yes, there was. So the Teamsters have, they ratified their contract for 2020, and those increases were the effect of that new contract.
Okay, and that's coming out of the general fund?
No, where you are seeing those increases, we're actually in the water, sewer, and storm funds, and that's where the employees' salaries are charged from.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Councilmember Stearns has a question.
Yeah, thanks. I was wondering if you could explain where the drug seizure money comes from, or how it gets allocated to us.
Okay, so I will do my best to explain, but during drug forfeitures or raids conducted by the police department, there's a couple of different types of drug seizure money that we get. Some of them are a direct result of the seizures that the activities of our own police department, and that money comes in to their assets, or sometimes it's physical assets, sometimes it's real property, and that money stays with the city once the forfeiture case is over. So there's a 45-day period in which the person that had assets seized can actually come back and ask for their assets back, saying that they were wrongfully taken from them. And once there's a judgment made, whether or not those assets belong to the city or not, once the trial is over, the city gets to retain those assets. They have to be spent for very specific purposes. They have to be spent towards drug enforcement activities. So any of the assets that the city retains must be used towards activities. And Doug may have a better explanation behind the use of those drug forfeiture funds.
Yeah, no, that's correct. We either get them as a shared revenue from our participation in various task forces, like the Valley Narcotics Task Force, VNet, or by our own actions. And they do have to go to, I can't remember the exact words, but basically to continue drug enforcement. So they might go to equipment, or they may even go to salaries, as long as that police officer is working in the drug enforcement area.
Thanks.
He does.
Any other questions, council? Okay, thank you, Jamie.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll now move on to item 4B, Planning Commission and Land Use Legislative Process. And I believe Planning Services Manager Jeff Dixon will be presenting.
This is Jeff Dixon, Planning Services Manager with the Community Development Department, and I appreciate their time this evening as part of your study session. I ask that you be patient with me and bear with me tonight as I get used to this software and this new process, so there may be some hiccups along the way. The topic tonight is to talk a little bit about the City of Auburn's Planning Commission. At its very simplest, the Planning Commission is a volunteer board that provides citizen review and recommendations on land use decisions. The Planning Commission acts as part of the city's overall legislative process by conducting the hearing on specific planning-related legislation. These include such things as the zoning code changes, our comprehensive land use plan and amendments to that, and other types of land use regulations, like our shoreline program, our subdivision code, also upcoming for the City Council in the future will be the city's floodplain regulations to be considered later this year. The purpose tonight is to really talk about three different areas that involve the Planning Commission. First, I'd like to describe a little bit about the state authority for planning as relationship to the Planning Commission and to the city's comprehensive plan. I'd also like to describe the basis in city code for the Planning Commission. And as the third topic, I'd like to talk a little bit about the operation of the Planning Commission as part of the city's overall legislative process. The constitutional basis for planning in Washington is provided as part of the police powers of the Washington State Constitution, and specifically stem from Washington State Constitution Article 11 and Section 11, where it's generally been found that the state has delegated to cities and towns the ability to implement regulations as part of the exercise of local police power and, for regulations that address sanitary and other regulations that do not conflict with general laws. And this principle has been upheld by Washington state courts that have found that zoning and other land use controls are a valid exercise of police power in furtherance of the public health, safety, morals, and welfare. When a municipality acts using proper procedures and considerations, the courts have generally accepted those municipal powers and presumed them to be correct. There is two particular state laws that form the basis for planning. Well, the state does not have a specific definition of planning. It's explained by the context of various laws that address required elements. The first one I'd like to touch upon is the optional municipal code. This is RCW 35A.63 that directs that code cities must adopt a comprehensive plan, and specifically that legislation provides that every code city by ordinance shall direct the planning agency to prepare a comprehensive plan for anticipating and influencing the orderly and coordinated development of land and building uses and for the code city and its environments. The comprehensive plan must be prepared as a whole or in successive parts and should integrate transportation and land use planning. The image on your screen shows the cover of the main comprehensive plan, the core plan, and a picture of the map. So in this context, the planning agency refers to the authority to establish a planning commission as assisted by professional staff. It specifies that the duties of the planning commission shall be established by ordinance, provides a range of membership from 3 to 12 members for the planning commission that being appointed by the mayor and confirmed by city council. Commissioners shall serve without respect to political affiliation and without compensation. It also goes on to specify that the planning commission must elect a chairperson, schedule monthly meetings, adopt rules for the conduct of their business, and keep a written record of their meetings and their actions. The other state statute that really addresses the Planning Commission is entitled the Planning Commission Act, and this is RCW 35.63. This contains overlapping responsibilities in terms of how it addresses the Planning Commission, but goes on to provide specific requirements about the city needing to enable the Planning Commission to prepare, adopt, and enforce coordinated plans for the physical development of the city, and this is generally known as the city's comprehensive plan. It also builds upon this and provides that in the interest of public health, safety, morals, and general welfare, the Planning Commission can recommend to the City Council development regulations to carry out the directives and policy guidance of the city's comprehensive plan. It can address such elements as the location and use of buildings, structures, and land, the height and size and design of buildings and other structures, size of yards and open spaces like setbacks that we typically deal with. It can specify residential density of housing and population. It can address the subdivision and development codes, and it can encourage access to public sunlight for solar energy systems. So this means that before any regulatory land use rules are adopted, the item must be submitted to the Planning Commission, and without undertaking that step, the action could be found to be void for failure to follow proper procedures. Additionally, I would be remiss if I did not mention another state law that highly influences the Planning Commission but does not directly prescribe their responsibilities, and that is the Growth Management Act that was enacted in 1990. It influences the Planning Commission because it addresses the most populated counties and cities in the state are required to fully plan and specify that they must adopt comprehensive plans containing certain required elements and may also contain additional optional elements. So with that, I'd like to transition to the local basis for the Planning Commission. In the city of Auburn, we've had a comprehensive plan and a planning commission from at least 1952. That's far back as I could trace it on a quick review. And having a planning commission, having a comprehensive plan back at that time was progressive because there were not requirements in state law for how the comprehensive plan had to be organized, what it needed to address, and there was also potentially a little reliance upon its content at that time. Since most of the Planning Commission format and responsibilities prescribed by state laws, the City Code section is fairly short and only contains 3 paragraphs. It's contained as attachment A to your agenda package. And it deals mostly with how the Planning Commission is specifically constituted in the city of Auburn. This code section at Auburn City Code section 2.45 specifies the commission will be composed of 7 members. Currently, we just have 6 members, so we're actively pursuing filling the remaining vacancy to get back to a full membership. We have members that reside in different parts of our community, got good representation all around. The commissioners serve for 3-year terms and may be reappointed. We have some commission members who have been on the board for many years, and some other commission members that are fairly new. The city's code also provides for an ex officio youth representative, but this particular provision has never been exercised because the youth representative from a local high school would not be a voting member. The city code also provides the ability for the mayor to appoint an 8th member, but this generally is not exercised because having an odd number of 7 members generally is more conducive to decision making. The Planning Commission's responsibility is largely legislative, and I'd like to explain a little bit about what I mean by that. A legislative action is one which affects the entire community and not just an individual property owner or a single parcel of land. And the types of decisions or actions that are legislative and therefore the purview of the Planning Commission include comprehensive plan amendments, adopting zoning code text or map amendments, because these apply to the entire community equally, and they don't affect separately any individual owner or consideration of any individual property or property owner. By contrast, there is quasi-judicial actions, and these are actions where the decision maker is sitting like a judge evaluating a specific proposal or circumstances affecting an individual property or an individual property owner. Examples of these types of quasi-judicial actions include variances where someone's asking for relief from a special circumstance or a regulation affecting their property, special use permits where somebody is seeking a particular administrative or conditional use for a land use on their property that requires that process prescribed by the zoning code, or where there is platting or subdivisions, either short plats or long plats, because they're affecting a particular site. And in each case, they're affecting a particular individual or family or partnership or corporation and not the entire community. The quasi-judicial actions are generally the responsibility of the city's hearing examiner, who will be, and speaking about the hearing examiner, will be a topic for a subsequent city council study session meeting. The only exception to that in terms of a quasi-judicial action acted upon by the Planning Commission is in the case of comprehensive plan map amendments, where someone or a property owner files an application with the city to change the mapped designation recognized by the city's comprehensive plan. And the reason that one is treated differently is because it is part of the city's overall comprehensive plan that is the charge of the Planning Commission. So the Planning Commission assists in helping to set up the long-term direction of vision for the community's future. And so although the Planning Commission is an advisory body and does not make final decisions, it is one of the most important groups in local government. As an example, in recent years, the attention given to growth management, to housing and affordability, and to environmental legislation have emphasized the importance of these land use decisions and the operations of the Planning Commission. Planning Commission and their public hearings is also a key component to public participation in the legislative process. The third item I'd like to talk about tonight is a little bit about the Planning Commission's role in the overall legislative process. And I've tried to diagram out here some of the main steps in that overall process. In the first box, I've listed that identifying a change to the comprehensive plan or a change to a development regulation is being identified. In the second box, the topic is scheduled for discussion by the Planning Commission at their regular monthly meetings. And then at that meeting, staff would present the topic and the proposed change or options for the change and discuss that with the Planning Commission members. The Planning Commission members themselves may have some discussion about their understanding of the topic, and often they come back and request information about other areas to help inform their decision-making and to make sure they have a complete understanding of the topic. So these third and fourth steps may involve various cycles back and forth as staff brings additional information back to the Planning Commission for discussion, and the Planning Commission then discusses those and makes sure that they have a thorough understanding. When the change or topic is ready for moving on, then staff will schedule that for a public hearing by the Planning Commission. In the next box, staff then completes the required public notice and the coordination that must go on by city code or city regulation in advance of that hearing. So generally, staff accomplishes such actions as posting the notice, sending out mailers to property owners that might be affected, and posting on the city website and in the newspaper. Then at the evening of the particular hearing, staff would present an overview of the topic and the proposed change. Then the Planning Commission would proceed to open the public hearing and accept testimony that may either be provided in writing or orally at the hearing. And then if the Planning Commission believes that they have an understanding of all of the concerns that have been brought up or all the comments that have been made and don't feel they need any other additional information, then they would proceed to close the public hearing. They can continue it, but if they do close it, then they can begin their deliberation and discussion, leading eventually to their recommendation and particular findings. Once the Planning Commission has concluded their actions, then staff would present the Planning Commission's recommendation to the City Council. Generally, that starts with the discussion at a study session, and then it's scheduled for action by the City Council at one of their regular council.
Jeff, I have a question.
Sure.
When they close the, going back to where the planning commissioners closed the hearing, at any time can they come back if they had some other questions before they present it to the council? Do they have a time frame in between it? If some other of the members had other questions, could they ever come back? Could they come back before they presented it to the council with any other questions?
Well, generally they don't close the public hearing if they feel they either have outstanding questions that have been raised by public testimony, or if they, on their own, if they have questions. I don't know exactly the parliamentary procedure for them, but I also feel like if I guess I'm unclear about their parliamentary procedure of reopening the public hearing, but that's probably possible as well.
Okay. Thank you.
So that really was the total of the topics that I wanted to introduce and discuss. And I want to pause a moment and open it up to any questions. And I'll let council members use their virtual hand raising or whatever is convenient to indicate if there's any other questions that I can help with.
Any questions, council?
Councilmember Stearns?
Yeah, hi. I had a question. So what kind of public engagement with the community does the Planning Commission do? How do they reach out to them?
Well, we've got, it depends on the type of action we're undertaking.
I mean, just in general, do they ever
Okay.
have any, get to know us, get to meet us, community events? Or?
Well, let me answer that in a couple different ways. On at least an annual basis, we have tried to get the Planning Commission scheduled for a joint meeting with the City Council to have a discussion about mutual shared interests. And that helps to make sure that they're on the same page in terms of the priorities of the city's overall comprehensive plan. Then if your question is more about the particular actions that they might be asked to make a recommendation on, like the city's shoreline master program, there's some required steps that staff has to do by city regulation that include notifying property owners, posting a legal ad in the newspaper, providing posted notices in public places about their code pages, making that information available on the city's website, and doing that all in advance of the prescribed time frame directed by city code.
But they don't do like town halls, right?
They have in some instances, like in 2015 when we were doing changes to our comprehensive plan, then they did some coordination efforts, but for most of the code amendments, we don't go to those extraordinary procedures.
Thanks.
Any other questions, council? Okay, Jeff, great presentation. Thank you very much, and very informative. And just for everybody listening or watching, two of our current council members both served as members of the Planning Commission, so Councilmember Baggett and Councilmember Trout Manuel have extensive experience working on the Planning Commission themselves. So thank you all very much. Any other discussion items tonight? Okay, hearing none, we are adjourned this evening. Thank you all.